Well, good afternoon, everyone. Today, my colleague Kyla McGregor will talk to you about dependents and qualifying relatives. And so, Kyla, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. So we are going to start with dependents. And I just apologize now. I'm the only one at the house and I got two dogs, so hopefully we don't have barking today. But we have one of them here at the moment, so hopefully not. But let me share my screen here and we'll get started. Okay. Just to start, we no longer have personal exemptions, at least until 2025, which we'll see what happens if they extend that law from the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act or not, or if we'll go back to having personal exemptions again. A few years ago, they like doubled the standard deduction and got rid of personal exemptions. So having dependents on the return is a little bit different right now. They don't necessarily count for as much at the moment, but so you don't get an exemption for each dependent anymore, but there are other credits and stuff that you might be able to get if you have the dependents on there. There's two types of dependents. There's a qualifying child or a qualifying relative. Spouses are not dependents. Some people, especially, give me 1 second. Sorry about that. Some people, especially newly married couples, or sometimes some of the international people, they get confused on dependents a little bit, and they think maybe if their spouse isn't working that their spouse is their dependent, but that is not the case. And then some college students get confused because they're like, oh, I'm supposed to put down who lives with me, and so they'll put their roommates or other people like that. So some examples of dependents are children, stepchildren, younger brothers and sisters, or elderly parents. You'll need to define dependents. Can help you with marital status. So you could maybe have head of household potentially. You need to know the dependents for that. And then the dependents section is in tab C of the 4012 guide. And you'll really get into dependents when you're going through the intake and when you're interviewing people to figure out if the dependent should go on the return or not. So the general definition of dependents is you can't claim a dependent if you yourself are a dependent. So if you're being claimed by your parents or somebody else, you can't claim a dependent. You can't claim a married person as a dependent unless they have some sort of qualifications, like if it's your child, they just got married, they're still pretty young, they don't have a lot of income, they could opt to not file with their new spouse, they could still be your dependent, but in general, you can't claim married people as dependents. The dependents have to be U.S. citizens, resident aliens, nationals, or residents of Canada or Mexico. If they're from any other country, you can't claim them as a dependent unless they have become a resident of the U.S. And you can't claim them dependent unless they're your qualifying child or relative. So there's different tests. So there's the dependent taxpayer test. You have to make sure they're not being claimed by somebody else. There's the joint return test. You have to make sure that they're not married, and the citizens test. So those are the 3 tests. We kind of already went through them already, but there's 3 different tests that you have to go through. For a qualifying child, there's a relationship test, an age test, a residency test, and a support test. So the relationship test, they have to be your son, daughter, stepchildren, foster children, or any descendant of them. Or your brother, sister, half stepbrothers, sisters, or any descendants of them. Not cousins. They're outside of the link of relatives. And adopted children are also considered your own children. So these are the relationships they have to be considered your child. And then there is a caveat with the brothers and sisters, they have to be younger than you, unless they're totally disabled. Age test, they have to be under 19 years old, so 18 or under. Or they have to be a full-time college student and under the age of 24. And they have to be considered at least, they have to be considered full-time students. Or if the child is permanently and totally disabled, age doesn't matter. Residency test, they must have lived with you for more than half of the year. There's some exceptions. If they don't live at your house because of temporary absence, which it could be if they're sick and they've been in a hospital for a long time or some other facility. If they're gone for school, or business or vacation, just temporary absences. And then a person who was born or died, a child that was born or died or kidnapped, do meet the residency test, even though they technically didn't live with you the entire year. But on the support test, the child can't provide more than half their own support. And a person's own funds are not support unless they're actually spent for support. So the child can't be paying for more than half their own. Any questions so far? Okay. So
I've got
sometimes,
question.
yes,
So they have an apartment that they live in all year, but they're college students. So they would still be considered a dependent.
yes,
Okay.
Yep.
Gotcha. Thanks.
yep. Now there are a lot of situations where the parents may not be living together, or they're just not, the parents aren't together. So sometimes we need to get into which parent can claim the child, or maybe neither parent can claim the child and maybe the grandparent can, or somebody or some other relative can. So we need to make sure, we need to try to call out and make sure that the child is only being claimed on one return, because we have had situations where we have a parent come in and they said, it's my year to claim the child, but maybe the other parent already did, or their grandma already did, and their return rejects. So whoever claims it, tries to claim it second, its return is going to get rejected. So we need to try to make sure that they know that it's their turn to claim the child. So for separated parent, a lot of times we have divorce decrees that we may have to look at to double check. We generally go by their word, but occasionally if we think that there's something off, we might want to check to make sure, either in a divorce decree or child custody papers. A lot of times the parents that have had custody issues will just bring that information because they know they've had issues in the past. But we need to know this because this will help us determine if they can be claimed as a dependent, if we can use them for child tax credit, head of household, dependent care credits, earned income credit. and premium tax credit. Sometimes one parent can claim some of these things and the other parent can claim a couple of these other things. Generally only premium tax credit is the only one that you do that. Generally the rest of them will be all lumped together. So, to determine, there's a bunch of rules to determine who can be the qualifying child of which person. Generally it'll be one of the children's parents for the most part. It's either based on the divorce decree or the child custody agreement, on which a lot of times it's every other year. If they don't have one, and generally it's the parent who the child lived with longer during the year. If they lived at each parent's the same amount, then it goes by which parent made more. So whose adjusted gross income was higher. If neither parent qualifies to claim the child for whatever reason, then you can go by the next person in the house who has the highest AGI, so maybe the grandparent. And so, well, and then if there's several relatives in the house that could claim it, it's the relative that has the highest adjusted gross income. So you first go by generally the parent, which parent they lived with the longest, unless they have some sort of agreement. Then you go by which one has the higher adjusted gross income, and then you go by which relative has the highest adjusted gross income. So those are kind of the general ones. Is there any questions on that? That was kind of confusing. Okay. So now we're going to talk about if they're a qualifying relative instead of a child. So it's a person who is not considered a child. So somebody who's either over 18 and they're not in school, or over 24 and they're not in, or over 24 in general. If they're not related to in one of those ways that we talked about. But the test we have to go through is make sure that they're not a qualifying child. Check the relationship. You have to check that person, the person that you're wanting to claim's gross income, and how much support you gave them. And qualifying relatives can be any age. So like I said, you need to make sure that they're not your child already. So it would be an older, like if your older child still lives with you and they're not working, maybe you potentially could claim them. Or your elderly parent, you could claim them potentially. They have to live as a member of your household for the entire year. They can be related to you in the following ways. They could be your child, stepchild, foster child, or descendant, brother, sister, half-brother, half-sister, stepbrother, stepsister, be your parents, your grandparents, or any other ancestor, step-parents, your nieces or nephews, your aunts or uncles, and then in-laws also count. So here's an example. Todd has lived with his girlfriend Eva and her 2 children. Eva is not required to file and does not file a tax return. Eva and her 2 children pass as the non-qualifying test to be Todd's relative if Todd meets the other tests. So they don't even have to necessarily be related to you, as long as you're providing more than half their support and their income isn't too high. So then it says, if you have the previous example, but Eva's income is $25,000, then her and her kids can't be claimed by Todd now because her income is too high. So they have to meet their gross income test. Their income has to be less than the threshold amount. Which I believe I should have wrote down what the amount was this year. And this test is only a test if it's for the qualifying relative. So this year, the person's gross income can't be more than $4,700. And that means all of their income can't be more than that. Now, if it's a parent, their social security plus their other gross income can't be more than 25,000. So you'd take half their social security plus their other income. So that one's a little bit different. But for everybody else, it's 4,700. So it's kind of a low bar as far as that goes. And don't forget, totally and permanently disabled people don't count for this because they're considered a child still. You need to provide more than half of that person's support. So the difference is, for qualifying child, they can't provide more than half their own support, but in this case, you have to provide more than half of their support. So like if multiple people are supporting this person, you have to make sure you're paying more than half of that. State benefits are considered support by the state, not the taxpayer. So you have to check on welfare things. Social Security benefits received by a child are considered to be provided by the child. So we have to look at some of those things, like if the child had a parent pass away or if they're getting other Social Security benefits of some kind. Scholarships are not taken into account. So if the child gets a scholarship, that doesn't count. So if your child's going to school, but they're over 25 and they don't count as a child anymore, the scholarship doesn't count for that. So we kind of already talked about this earlier. I think I got the slides in the wrong order. So if the parents don't live together, like I said, we'll have a custodial parent and a non-custodial parent. And it's which one who lives with them longer. And so sometimes, even if they have a divorce or if they don't have a divorce decree, you'll have to have, if one parent decides to give the other one able to claim the child, you'll have the custodial parent, the one that's supposed to be able to claim them, can say, oh, I don't want to this year, I'll give it to the other person. They're allowed to do that, but we have to fill out a form saying that they're giving permission to give the other person custody of the child. So there is another caveat on who can claim the children if they don't have paperwork and maybe their AGI isn't the higher one. The one that technically could take the child can say, I don't want to this year and give it to the other person. So that's another caveat that I didn't talk about earlier as far as children goes. But let's back up. Does anybody have any questions so far about relatives? Okay. Okay, we already kind of talked about that. So here's a question. Ted's divorced and has a daughter that lives with him and his ex-spouse for equal number of nights. Ted's AGI is 45,000. His ex-spouse is 30,000. So in this case, Ted would get to because his AGI is higher unless he gives permission to the other spouse or if they have some sort of agreement that says otherwise. So this is the really nice chart to look at. Going through all those things we already talked about. This makes it a little less confusing, a little more compact. This is in the 4012 guide, in section C3. So this kind of compares the two tests. So over here for qualifying child, it says they must be, who it must be, son, daughter, brothers, and sisters. The age requirements, under 19, under 24, or totally disabled, lived with you for more than half the year, did not provide more than half their own support, and is not filing their own joint return. And they're your child based on custody. Relative, they're not one of these people. They must be related to you based on the relatives, and there's another table that shows all those that I mentioned earlier. And their gross income must be less than $4,700, or if they're on Social Security, half their Social Security plus their other income can't be more than 25, and they can't provide, and you have to provide more than half their support. So there's a difference there. So just in summary, somebody can't be claimed more than once. You can't claim a person if you're being claimed by somebody else, or if you're being, you can't claim someone if you're being claimed. They have to be citizen, resident, national, or resident of Canada or Mexico. And they have to be either a child or a relative. So any questions about the dependency part? That was a lot. Before we moved into child tax credit. Okay. So the child tax credit for this year is non-refundable again. You have, so which means that you have to have a tax liability to take the credit. So if you don't owe any tax, you can't get the child tax credit. The most you can receive is $2,000 per child, and it's for children 16 and younger. So if your child's a senior and they're 17, they're unfortunately you can't get the child tax credit for them anymore. As a taxpayer, you must have a Social Security number or an ITIN number. And I mean, we wouldn't get any of these people generally, but if they're married, they can't make more than $400,000, and if they're single, they can't make more than $200,000. We would not see any of these people, but just in case, those people can't get the child tax credit either. Their income is way too high. So the child has to be under 17, so 16 or younger. They have to be a U.S. citizen, national, or resident. They must be your dependent. They must be your son, daughter, adopted step or foster, or any descendant, or brother or sister, half step, or any descendant of them. And the child cannot provide more than half their support, and they must live with you for more than half the year, and the child has to have a Social Security number. The taxpayers do not, but the child does. So if you have somebody come in, only one parent has one, that's okay. As long as the child does, then you can take the child tax credit. But if the child does not have a Social Security number, then you cannot take it. So that's one thing to look out for. If the parents are like, oh, I have 2 kids, but maybe one of them does not have a Social Security number, you can only take it for one of the children. So if they ask about that, the children have to have Social Security numbers.
Kyla, if I may ask quickly, and maybe you're going to cover this here soon, but when must I have the child's Social Security card or number assigned? How does that affect your tax return?
Yes, and I did not put that in there, and I didn't even think about that, and we've been dealing with this issue for recently. So we've been having a lot of refugees in the past couple of years with the different wars throughout the world. The parents have to have the Social Security number by April 15th of 2024. So if they want to claim this child for 2023, they have to have the social security number or applied for it before April 15th of 2024. We had an issue last year with some of the Ukrainian refugees where they applied, but they didn't get the cards before April 15th, and they were disallowed the credit, but we were able to go back and say, yes, they applied for this, they just didn't get the number. So as long as they have applied before April 15th of 2024, we can take this. Or if you end up doing a prior year, you have to make sure it's that they applied within that year that they filed.
Thank you,
So-
Kyla.
Question
Yep.
about that. If you apply for a social security number, are you guaranteed a social security number?
That is a great question. I am not sure, actually. I know for like the refugees, they are because of the status that they have. Now, if it's another type of international person moving here, I'm not sure. But I know for the refugees, they do automatically get them, but I'm not sure for other people that are immigrating to the United States. I am not sure about that. I
think
don't know.
what-
Do you know, Dr. Moody?
Well, I was just gonna say, I think what we do is we take a look at the immigration documentation status, so to speak, the policy. So like Afghani families, they came to the US depending upon the first two tiers, where mom, dad, the siblings all had social security cards. So they had them when they came to file. With the Ukrainian families, mom, dad were able to receive social security numbers right away. Their children were eligible too, but they had to apply when they were settled in the US. I think the key thing is that when did they get their paperwork in? Were they notified that their paperwork was received? And then there's the families we have been working with had also received a letter that they were just running late in getting the numbers filed. But yes, you see, I think there are times when people do not qualify their social security numbers because of status or their missing documentation.
Thank you.
Okay, so there's a nice little question and answer in the 4012 guide to kind of help us out with this. So if we're having trouble figuring out if they qualify for this, you can go through, is the person, do they qualify as your qualifying child? And you have to make sure that they're a child. Does the child have, what type of ID does the child have? Or what type of ID does the person have? And then, and was the child a US citizen, national, or resident? Were they under 17? And then does the child have a social security number? So we can go through the steps and then that'll help us determine if they're a child or not, or considered for child tax credit or not. Now, there is something that's a refundable credit called the additional child tax credit. So only some people will qualify for this. And now this one is refundable, so they can get this part even if they don't owe tax anymore. They can get up to 2,500, but they have to have some earned income to get this one. So if they don't owe tax and they don't have any what's considered earned income, which we'll go through in a later session, they still won't be able to get this one. They have to have some earned income. They have to at least have $2,500 of earned income to get this. So if they have none, they can't get this credit. Now, if they do have a lot of children, they don't need to have income, but if they have 2 or less, they have to have some income. And this credit is limited to 1,600. So they upped this a little bit. Last year was 1,500, 1,600 this year. But that's per child. Now there's another option for people if they can't get the child tax or the additional child tax, they could get credit for other dependents. Again, this one's non-refundable, so again, you have to have a tax liability to take this one. Max is $500. This is for the children if they're over 16 or dependents that you have that have other relationships. So you could get this for like your parent, if your parent lives with your elderly parent lives with you, you could get this for them. Because this is just other dependents. The word child has nothing to do with this. Or if your children, or if any of the children don't have social security numbers, they can take the other dependent credit instead. They still have to be a US citizen, national, or considered to be a resident, and they have to have a ATIN number, ITIN number, or social security number. So they still have to have some sort of identifying number. Again, there's a nice little chart in the 4012 guide where we can go through and say, is this one of your is this your qualifying relatives? Do they have one of the document or ID documentation? And are they citizen or relative or national or resident alien? So this one's a lot more simple, and it's a lot more widespread, and more people can take this than the child tax credit. Like dependency, in general, it's the person who's considered the custodial parent or the one that's claiming the child as a dependent is generally the one that would take this. Like I mentioned before, the other person can, if the one that's supposed to take it gives them permission. And the document that you'd have to fill out for that is the 8332. And you have to attach that to the tax return. So here's an example of that. Mary and Ralph got a divorce in 2015. They have a child, Amy, who lives with Mary all year. They're all citizens and have social security numbers. Mary and Ralph together provide more than half of Amy's support. Mary's AGI is 31,000, Ralph is 39, Amy's 12. The divorce decree doesn't say. In this case, you go by who they live with first and then AGI. So since she lives with Mary, even though Ralph's AGI is higher, you go with Mary as the custodial parent. But Mary could say, I'm not taking it this year, Ralph can. Now, like I said earlier, there is some instances where she can give up the child tax credit, but she would still claim earned income credit head of household. So there is in this certain situation, she would still take some of the things. So there is check boxes when you put in dependents where you can say this child qualifies for child tax credit, this child qualifies for earned income credit, head of household. There's check boxes on the dependent screen. So if we have a situation like this where the parent's only giving up certain things, we have to make sure we check the correct boxes.
Isla, is it fair to say that earned income credits go where the child lives the longest?
Yes.
Okay, because the other credits, the parents can decide, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Thank you.
And head of household is also where the child lives the longest. So we have a couple of other examples. Jose and Yolanda Almeida are filing joint. They have 5 children under 17. Jose and Yolanda have social security numbers. Their children have ITIN numbers. Can their children be qualified for child tax credit? That would be no, because the children have ITIN numbers. So in this case, for child tax credit, it doesn't really matter what the parents have. It matters what the children have. So the children have to have social security numbers for them to take it. Another example, Ed, Jeff's son, turned 17. He has a social security number. He does not qualify for child tax anymore because he was 17 by the end of the year. So even though he was 16 for most of the year, he turned 17 by the end of the year, so he's no longer qualifies. Another example, Rob and Susan file a joint return. They have social security numbers. They have a tax liability. They have 3 dependents. Their son's 18. Jill is 16 and adopted and has an ATIN number. And Esther's mother is 65, but she has an ITIN number. So they can claim them all, but they're all qualifying relatives other than Jill because of age and how their relationship is. But they can take the credit for other dependents for all of them. They can't take the child tax credit for Jill, even though her age is right, because she only has an ATIN number. She doesn't have a social security number. And Tom is too old, and Esther is obviously a parent, so she's not a child. So but they can do credit for other dependents for all 3 of them. Laura adopted Jack, who's 12. He's a citizen and has lived with Laura for the entire year, and she provides full financial support. So yes, Jack is a qualifying child for child tax credit because adopted children count as long as they have the social security number. Which one of the following individuals, all of whom have 2 qualifying children, are eligible to claim the maximum $2,000 child tax credit? Fiona is married, filing separate, and her AGI is really high, so she's a no. She cannot. Her AGI is too high. Ken is qualifying surviving spouse. He has an AGI of 30,000 and his tax liability is 490. He can't take the full amount because his tax liability is only 490, but he can take some. He can take 490,000 of it. Nick, who is single, he is makes 70,000. His tax liability is 5,000. So yes, he can take the entire thing because his liability is 5,000. And then Julie, who's married, but her income, again, way too high, so she cannot take it. So in this situation, the only person that can take the full amount is Nick. Ken can take some, but not all of it, and the other 2 in this situation can't take it at all. Couple other examples. Mary and Bob are married, filing joint, have 2 children who qualify for child tax credit. Their AGI is 56,000. Their tax liability is 954. Like I mentioned in that last one, they can only claim 954 because it's a non-refundable credit. But they can take some of the additional child tax credit though. So there is a calculation on the 8812, which is the form to do the child tax credit that will calculate this for us. Next example, Stan Files head of household, has 3 children who qualify for child tax credit. Stan makes 54,000. His tax liability is 4,680. He's eligible to take the entire amount because take up to 4,680 because of the 3 children, even though he technically could take 6,000 if his AGI is higher or his tax liability is higher. So I kind of wanted to show you what the 8812 looks like at this point. I pulled that up here. So this form will be populated if you put a child in and they meet the qualifications. The tax software will go through here and look at the adjusted gross income. If there's any adjustments to that, number of children under 17, and it'll multiply that by 2,000. The number of children over 17 or who's considered relative, and it'll multiply that by 500. So the child tax credit and the credit for other dependent both get calculated on here. And then it'll go by, is their income too high or not? And then it'll limit the amount based on what their tax liability is. And then it'll show you the total amount of the credit that can be taken. On the second page, is the additional child tax credit. So if they have some income, and they haven't taken the entire child tax credit, it'll go through and calculate the additional child tax credit amount. And then this bottom part is if you have 3 or more or children, then this is the calculation for that additional child tax credit. Or apparently if you're from Puerto Rico, but we don't see too many of those people. And of course, there's instructions. If you really want to get in the weeds on that, you can. And here I have the 4491 is where I got most of the examples. So if you want to have a good read, this is more of a textbook version of the information. So there's a dependence lesson, so it goes through on who's dependents, and there's different, it talks about each one, and it gives all the examples that I showed, the different relationship tests and things like that. So if you're more of a person that understands more by reading, you might want to go in and do this. And additionally, I think Dr. Moody sent out the new link, the link learntaxescertification.com is under maintenance, which is good because when I tried it the other day, it was working extremely slow and not very well. So hopefully they get it up and running soon. You can go to if you haven't picked up, or if you haven't been able to pick up a 6744 test booklet, you can go to the IRS website and all of the books actually that we talk about. You can go to the IRS website and look at forms and publications, and you can search for them in here. So the test booklet is 6744, and you can pull that up. So if you want a PDF version of any of the things that we've discussed, you could type 4012 and that will come up. Or the 4491, the one I just showed you, you can type those in and they're all on here. They're all updated. So if you want to go look through those things while the electronic version of the lessons and the testing site is not working, you can, and you haven't been able to pick up the books in person, you can go on the IRS website and find all these publications. So is there any questions or comments or anything like that about this topic?
So once again, Kyle, I think it's fair to say that making sure we got the correct filing status, we're using our 4012 charts, etc., that most of what we talked about is going to be auto-populated into the tax return. So it's critical that we get names entered in correctly, both years entered in correctly, as well as identifying numbers.
And if you want to take a look at the intake interview sheet, it's on here too. It's in multiple languages. So you'll want to make sure you find one that you can read. Let's see, let's find English. Where's the English one?
We could do Spanish.
I could do Spanish. Oh, there's the English one. The English
Okay.
one is the one that doesn't say a different language on the end. So all the other ones say what language it is, but the English one is just plain.
And at sites, you'll be provided both English and Spanish.
Yes.
Maybe some Vietnamese seem to be the three most popular languages.
Yeah. But yeah, we get printed versions of English and Spanish, and then we can, if we need to, we can get some other languages printed if we think it's necessary. But yeah, so we need to really go through this and make sure that we get their names right. They have them put that on here, and that they check the marital status and that we can figure out if they're together or not. If not, when these things happen, so. And then here is where we go through the dependent and the child tax credit things. So they'll list the kids or the relatives or whoever. Like I said, sometimes people list anybody who lives in their house regardless on if they would qualify or not.
Yes, so you may
know-
have roommates listed that are not.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Some people will list roommates, things like that. So we kind of got to look and be like, okay, how old is this person compared to the person I'm doing? Are they related at all? Have they lived with them? Are they citizens or residents of US, Canada, Mexico? Single or married? Are they students or are they disabled? And then they'll fill out that part. And then we go through this part, and this will help us determine the different credits and things like that. So we'll go through and say, okay, is this a qualifying child or a relative? Yes or no? Did this person perform more than half of their support? Yes or no? So we'll ask them these questions. Did the person have less than $4,700, make less than $4,700? Did the taxpayer perform more than half the support, or did the taxpayer pay more than half the cost of keeping up the home? So as you can tell, these are the questions about the child tax credit, or about the child being a dependent or a relative. And then this last question is the head of household question, maintaining more than half the cost of the home. So between these 5 questions, this will help us call out which of the credits and which filing status they can use. So
Wonderful.
anyway,
Thank you, Kyla. Are there other questions or comments? I'm very happy that some folks joined us while we were working through this. We will have this presentation and the slide deck available later this week, and we'll send out an email letting folks know when. You all should be getting an email that was sent out to site coordinators earlier today regarding, as Kyla was saying, the address for the Lincoln Learn certification. And as soon as that site comes live, which they're thinking hopefully December 11th, next Monday, fingers crossed, that it's going to be able to operate in an efficient manner. But when that happens, we will let you know. It is looking like potentially this Wednesday, Thursday, Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. If you're not a Nebraska Department of Revenue employee, but you can come in and pick up your retest. That publication 6744 and publication 4012. We do have a limited number, so we don't want to run on these things. But if you learn best through paper, we want you to have a copy. If you learn best with electronic, if you can do the electronic, that's good. But anyway, we'll do our best to make sure that we say 4012 guides, Jim, for example, for Anderson, so that there's at least one 4012 guide per site, paper copy, because we use those tables so much. So that's kind of updates. Kyla, what do we have on tab for Wednesday? What's missing on that?
Wednesday is earned income credit. So that'll be a good one.
Yep, that'll be a great one. And then Friday will be child independent. No, yeah,
Friday's
child
the
independent.
pendant credits.
Yes.